we're back, and we are getting ready to start a conversation about climate change. We're joined on set by a well-known face with us here at Open Your Eyes, Carlos Fuller, and he's the International Liaison Officer for the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, the 5 C's.
5 C's.
All right, I have to count them when I say them. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning, Melody. Morning, Zane.
Good morning.
So, we were having a chat during the break, talking about all the different things we're seeing across the world that people are now able to attribute to climate change and the effects of climate change. And it seems to be a time where globally the conversation has really been wrapped up, where the concerns are what are we going to do and what are we going to do now? I want to ask from your perspective, because you've been working in this particular field long before people took climate change seriously. Just what does this indicate to you?
Well, certainly the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was issued last year, shows that we are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. Yeah. Since the Industrial Revolution, globally temperatures have risen by 1 degree Celsius. Yes. And we are now feeling the impacts of that rise of temperature. We're seeing more heat waves, we're seeing stronger hurricanes, we're seeing acidification of the Caribbean Sea, we're seeing more bleaching of the coral reefs, we're seeing a melting of the ice caps in both the Arctic and the Antarctic, and in the glaciers in Peru, in India, Bhutan, and so on. So we're seeing all these impacts already, and definitely the scientific evidence is showing it can be attributed to this 1 degree rise of temperature.
Yeah. Now, I feel that some of the things that you've mentioned have been discussed before as the potential impacts of climate change. Are we seeing these impacts sooner than was first predicted?
The manifestation is there. I think what we're seeing is more robust scientific evidence is coming to the fore. So yes, we had indications before, 1 or 2 papers on the subject, but since the first IPCC report was published back in 1988, so here we are now almost 30 years later. Indeed, there's more scientific evidence, and we're seeing greater and greater manifestations of it. So when you go along the coast of Belize, for example, the tremendous erosion that we're now seeing along our coastline, the amount of coral bleaching that we have been seeing, indeed, was presaged in 1988, and we're now seeing it at this time.
Yeah. And this is owing to a 1 degree rise, you said, right?
That's correct. It is only a 1 degree rise. And the whole point of the Paris Agreement was that we want to limit it to as far below 2 degrees Celsius as possible, aiming for 1.5. And what the scientific evidence is now telling us is that at 1.5, it's going to be far worse, but at 2 degrees, catastrophic.
Now, we're looking at the fact that this, for all intents and purposes, is a man-made phenomenon, so to speak. How do we now tell the world, you know what, the way we're consuming fossil fuels or the way we're doing things as they are in terms of our environment is what is now attributing to climate change and the extreme weather events that we're seeing?
And in fact, that is one of the big points coming out of this 1.5 report by the IPCC. It is telling us that if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we must cut emissions of greenhouse gases by 50% by 2030. We only have 11 years to act. If we do not cut by 50%, indeed, the 1.5 target becomes impossible. And by 2050, we have to become carbon neutral. That means that we have to absorb as much as we are emitting. That is where we are right now.
I presume, however, that the average person would think, perhaps this is something for the developed nations to tackle. Because when you look at China, Russia, the United States, these are huge countries that have the economic wherewithal to be able to address specific areas of this issue. But when you look at a developing nation like Belize, we're totally dependent, for instance, on fossil fuels. How do we go fully green by 2030?
Well, in fact, to me, the biggest challenge is on the developed countries, indeed, to take it on. They have a historic responsibility because since 1700, they have been the ones that have been emitting these greenhouse gases. However, they are so dependent on fossil fuels at this stage that it is very difficult for them to change, but they can do it. In fact, the United Kingdom this year has pledged to do that exactly, to cut their emissions by 50% by 2030, ramping up what they had proposed to do, and by 2050 will become carbon neutral, and they're now creating the laws to do it. So if the UK can do it, we're saying the rest of the world can do it. Fortunately for a country like Belize, I think we are in a better position because we have the natural resources to go with renewable energy. So we have the biomass from ASR, BSI, and the other sugar factories. We have hydropower. We have the capacity to use a lot more solar power. Germany is the leading nation in the world using solar power. Yet during the winter months, they only have 4 hours of sunshine. We basically have 12 hours winter and summer. So obviously we have that capacity. We can do it with the financial and technical capacity assistance.
Here's the thing, as you would appreciate, however, renewable energy is an alternative to what we're presently using. However, if you look at solar power, for instance, the cost of purchasing solar panels and batteries and what have you, and the amount of space that you would need the larger you go, is impractical for the average person. Because as it stands, government doesn't give us any tax relief on importing any element that has to do with solar or renewable energy. So we would still have to pay the taxes to be able to bring those items in. And we're saying, look, if you look at it from a dollars and cents cost benefit point of view, essentially, if you're looking at solar power, you're asking me to pay for a light bill up front and expect to collect back on it down the road. And if we're living in difficult times, then how do I now make that investment and expect to recoup it down the road based on energy savings and what have you? How do you sell that to the masses of Belizeans who are, living day to day?
Indeed, Stanley, you're quite right. And that is why it requires an entire change of your policy at the regional and at the national level. And in fact, in some parts of the world, solar power is now cheaper than using fossil fuels in certain parts of the world where they're actually making the panels and so on. So indeed, we need to have that total change of our economic policy. When petroleum was selling at over $100 per barrel, we in the Caribbean were spending 70% of our foreign exchange in purchasing petroleum. So obviously, that is a savings that we could have used if we're using our own natural resources. So obviously, we need the government's incentives to shift how, tax incentives for putting in solar power, both at your domestic level, at your household level, but also at a utility scale level. So you would want to get an independent power producer to come in and say, yes, I can get some land that is not good for agriculture, that is maybe mangrove type land or wetlands, and can I put solar panels on that vast array and then use that as another source of power at a utility scale level to produce power. So I think we need to get that kind of incentives going. And I believe at the last time the PUC actually did a request for proposals, about 10 or 20 of them actually came in with renewable energy sources. So indeed, that is where you need to get the brain power of the country involved, as opposed to only a BL or 1 or 2 things. You need to get the brain power of Belize to show, look, this is all the source of energy that we have that we can exploit.
It is similar to the global perspective, though, where the concept of those who need to be making the changes are the ones who aren't. And that's what I wanted to touch on. It's important for developing countries to make our own changes and to acknowledge the type of mitigation efforts we'll have to make, because we really do face most of the impact, or a lot of the impact of climate change. But those who are contributing also have to buy in. And I want to ask that question to you. Since the release of the report, where are we in getting the full buy-in from those countries that are producing the most emissions? You use the UK as a good example. Who are the other ones who still need a bit of nudging?
Well, certainly there were 4 countries that really did not buy into that 1.5 report.
That's right.
And those were Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Russia, and the United States of America. And we know they are some of the biggest producers of petroleum or coal-based power. And so those are the countries that we really have to address. However, what is good to see was that the other 190, 195 countries bought into it, saying, yes, we can do it. So obviously, these four are the outliers. And if the rest of the world, if 99% of the world is going to go one way, obviously these four countries are going to be left behind, because they will not be able to participate in this new green economy that is coming, regardless of them participating or not. So I do believe that they will take it on. It's interesting to note that the UN Secretary General is going to have a climate summit on the 23rd of September, where they're going to ask all these countries to make announcements of how they're going to ramp up these pledges. At the same time, that same evening, the Democratic Party is going to have its presidential debate on climate change. So here we have, it's going to take on the political context in the United States. And so I could see a shift coming because of the rest of the world going one way, and the US realizing we have to keep abreast.
Well, I think the world was taken aback when the President of the United States scoffed at the idea of climate change being a real situation that is taking place globally. I think when and you'll forgive me, I mean, he's known for making these off-the-wall remarks, but that one was, to me, perhaps one of the biggest, whoa, scratch your head moment. You know, the rest of the world acknowledges this thing to be real, and we're being affected by it on a day-to-day basis. And here comes this one person who's the head of a nation, arguably the largest, you know, power in the world, that says, well, it may be a figment of one's imagination.
Well, I think too, if I could add to that, and that was really one of the questions I wanted to ask, not specifically to what we've seen from the President of the United States, but the growing numbers of what they call climate change deniers. And I think that some of it comes from just being skeptics about everything, and some of it comes from buying into where financially it may be difficult for some countries, or it may be expensive for some countries to make the shift. When you say there are only a handful of nations, these are powerful nations and big countries that contribute very much to the emissions that we currently have. But what can the rest of the world do? And what are we planning on doing? When we often feel like the smaller states, we have the numbers though. What's being done to help to lobby to make the necessary change?
Well, first of all, let me say that of some of those countries that are deniers are actually getting ready already. They are taking action at home. Their concern is really if shifts occurs too quickly, their economies are left out in the cold. So is Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, which depends 99.9% of their foreign exchange comes from the export and the use of petroleum products. Obviously, they have an issue. And how they're addressing it is, how do you have a transition of their economy to one that does not depend upon it? So I think it's from that point of view. The other issue, though, is that if the rest of the world slowly reduces, or, well, I should say quickly stops using petroleum-based products, obviously they will not have that influence, because indeed these other sources of energy are there. And I think it is coming, because we are seeing a lot more investment now in wind and solar than we've ever seen before. And that is occurring. And so I think you will see countries moving towards that area, because they recognize that the teenagers are in the streets now every Friday protesting. They are the voters of tomorrow. Whether we like it or not, they will have a voice. And that is really where I believe we should depend our hope on. Because if they, instead of only protesting on the streets, but then take that protest to the ballot box next year, indeed we will see the dramatic shift we require.
Is it the case in other countries? Because I know in the US, for example, while the leader of that country says one thing, the individual states also make their own mandates to be able to reduce their own emissions within their, where they have jurisdiction. Is it the same in other countries as well that have been denying the results of the report?
They are not as large group within those countries, with a Saudi Arabia or a Russia towards that area. But certainly I know they have activists there also. In fact, Saudi Arabia's, there's one group which has been appealing to an international organization to assist them in creating a climate change center. So indeed, that work is occurring, but it is probably not at the scale that we're seeing in California, New York, and so on.
Where does the Caribbean stand in all of this? we're one block of countries, so to speak. Where do we stand in terms of our position going forward? What is our mandate, and how are we proceeding towards achieving what our mandate sets out?
Well, indeed, the CARICOM countries are fully endorsing the 1.5 degree target, recognizing that we are dependent upon it for our survival. And in fact, we have created some regional policies on energy, on banning plastics. So indeed, at the policy level, we are taking action, and at the negotiating level, we are fully on board, really at the forefront of the negotiations through the Alliance of Small Island States, indeed taking this at the international level.
Let's go a bit deeper into that, because the Association of Small Island States has been a very loud voice on this issue. And in fact, we saw an article put out by Ambassador Lois Young, really highlighting why it's important that people need to take the report seriously, and that essentially denying what it claims is dismissing countries like ours and the impacts that we're facing. What does it change with us being the chair of AOSIS and having such a loud voice in this issue at this time?
Well, certainly, it really puts Belize at the center stage. So the Alliance of Small Island States, which was created back in around 1990, has been the advocate, the champions of climate change globally within the climate change negotiation process, representing 43 small island and low-lying states, Belize, Suriname, and Guyana. And Belize, having taken on this role on behalf of the Alliance, is really now at the forefront. And we are very fortunate in having articulate spokespersons like Ambassador Young leading the charge. And so when we go to the climate change negotiation process, it is Belize, speaking on behalf of these 43 countries, that takes the center stage in articulating the science, saying, please don't be sorry for us. What we're telling you is that our position is based on science. It is not because we feel a certain way. The scientific evidence tells us that this is what is occurring and this is what is going to occur. And this is what we've been able to articulate. And because of that position, whenever we have these informal sessions, we are now sitting at the table with the big players, with the United States, with the EU, with Japan, with the Saudis, where we come to an agreement on how we move this issue forward. So beyond the public stage, we're also sitting in the coffee tables next to each other, coming up with these positions. So indeed, Belize has now taken on a very important role in this process.
Yeah. And in terms of negotiations, to be able to hit that target by 2030, what type of changes are we talking about?
Well, the changes are immense.
Yeah.
First of all, it deals with the sources of energy, from petroleum and coal to less emitting powers. So we can even go to something like natural gas, which is not as emits as much greenhouse gases as coal or petroleum. But it also, we need to look at how we are dealing with our food supply. At the moment, I think studies are showing that the world, wastes 70 to 80% of the amount of food we produce.
Wow.
And when we're doing that, we are wasting the water that we use to grow it. And when we use, and with that water, you use energy to pump the water. And when you're planting that amount, your soil is emitting a lot of nitrogen dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the soil. So that's an area we need to cut by 50%. So obviously, and we have enough food to feed the world. So if we're throwing away 80%, imagine we can feed the entire world and still cut the amount we're producing by 1/2.
And then the flip side of that is that we're saying, look, starvation is a real situation and there's more than enough to go around and feed everyone.
Exactly. So it's just the way we are working. We have too much of a disposable income. All of us are sort of like responsible. When the S11 or the iPhone 11 comes along, of course we'll throw away the 10. And we have to go for the 11, right?
Guilty as charged.
And all of us have that consumerism within us, and it is something that we really have to address.
Yeah, and that's making a cultural shift. I think that is going to be very radical, because it is moving away from what we have developed over time. the consumerism. Let's just use Belize as an example. People going to the rice and bean style, they give you more rice, even if you won't finish it, rather than the one that gives you just enough that you need to
serving.
eat. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and how do we make that shift away? Indeed, it's going to require that cultural change at the individual, the family, the municipal level. We all have to act on it.
Yeah. All right. What we got to do right now is going to take a quick pause in the conversation. And when we come back, we'll continue talking about climate change, but we'll also look at some of the effects that we've been seeing here in Belize and in this region. So please stay tuned.
We know that in today's busy business environment, you need banking to be fast, flexible, and convenient. With Belize Bank's free online banking, you can process employee payroll, make Social Security contributions, make GST payments, process customs duty payments, view account information, pay bills, and more. Sign up for Belize Bank online today and spend more time focusing on what matters most, the success of your business. Belize Bank Online. Easy, convenient, secure.
Fishing is my profession. So that's my grind. That's why I do for a living. I got smartphone due to where it helped me communication when I did at sea. So I stick with smart. My passion for the sea, that's my livelihood. I stay on the grind with smart.
We all look forward to enjoying those golden years after a life of dedication and hard work. Thanks to Social Security Board, we can enjoy life with a peace of mind, knowing that our savings are there for us now. A retirement benefit is a return on the investment you have made through your SSB contributions. The benefit is either a grant or a pension. If you have at least 26 contributions, you can receive the one-time retirement grant. If you have 500 or more contributions, you will receive the pension, which is a monthly payment. You can claim within 13 weeks of retirement if you're between the ages of 60 and 64 and not employed, or as soon as you're 65. We encourage persons approaching retirement age to check on their contribution history. Want to know more about retirement benefit? Visit our website or contact any of our offices to have someone assist you. Also, be sure to visit our Facebook page and give us a like to stay informed. Social Security Board, safeguarding you, your family, your future.
And we're back, and we're continuing our conversation with International Liaison Officer of the 5 Cs, Carlos Fuller. If you're just joining us, we started off talking about climate change and the latest report that came out talking about the need for the globe to hit a 1.5 target sooner rather than later, and all that we need to do to get there. Mr. Fuller, I want to move the conversation into looking at the effects of climate change, because while we can talk about the world politics of it and the changes that countries like the USA or Russia or Saudi Arabia have to make, in a local context it means a lot more. How do you explain to the everyday Belizean who's watching how we are seeing the effects of climate change today?
Well, one of the biggest impacts we can see is along the coast of Belize. And when you go to Dangriga, Monkey River, and so on, I mean, it is stark evidence of where you can see many yards of beach having been washed away.
Yeah.
I would never recall going down to Monkey River and a couple telling me and pointed out about 20 yards into the sea, we got married out there 30 years ago, and it is now under 10 feet of water. You're seeing...
Can you tie it together for us? How does climate change lead to erosion?
Oh, certainly. So with climate change, as the sea heats up, it expands. Warm water expands, so the sea rises. But in addition to that, any ice that melted that was on land also goes into the sea. So all of this contributes to sea level rise. And while maybe 100, 200 years ago, we were seeing a rise of 3 millimeters per year. It is now up to 5 millimeters per year globally. But of course, it's not even around the world. Some parts, because of the spin of the Earth, because of wave action and so on, is higher than in other areas. And in addition to that, we're seeing even stronger waves. So we're seeing a lot more erosion than we ever saw before. And that is exactly what we're seeing along the coast of Belize. Now, you cannot attribute it totally to climate change, because we are also doing things to our environment that are not helpful. So cutting down mangroves, excavating more sand from the river, diverting water from the rivers for irrigation. All of these things also contribute to what we are experiencing.
Yeah.
But that is a stark manifestation of the impacts of climate change. We're also seeing a lot more bleaching of the coral reef than we ever saw before.
Wow.
We're seeing, in fact, even our fruit seasons seem to be in disarray. You know, you're never sure when the mango season is going to occur.
Thank you. My mango tree was most frustrating this year.
Yes, and we're all feeling the effects of it. But indeed, it is affecting that in some parts.
These are the things that we either take for granted or we overlook, because we don't look at the specific implications of what we consider to be climate change. We look at it from a broad perspective and say, okay, well, it's only the weather and the rise in the water and what have you, but we don't look at, like Marlene is saying, the mango tree and the apples and these other fruits are being affected as well.
But yet it is the person that depends on it who recognize it. So the fishermen are recognizing these changes. I recall one tour guide telling me where he used to be able to take people out to see grouper. It's no longer there at that time of the year, you know, and so indeed these people who depend on the natural environment are seeing those changes, and we probably need to get more in touch with them so that they can tell us even more information, so we can do the research to see what are the driving factors, and then what we can do to affect the change, because obviously we have to do some kind of adaptation measure to address these issues.
So, you know, adapting, and I think what you pointed out with the mango, which most people can relate to, is important, because when you think in terms of what we are as a country, where we are so dependent on our agricultural sector, it means that farmers who are planting far more crops than the one tree we think of in our backyard no longer have the level of predictability on return. When you talk adaptation, what are we talking about here?
Well, in the area of agriculture, and that is a huge area for many parts of the world, the whole issue of food security. Do you need to get more water on a regular basis for your crops? So we used to be very dependent on rainfall. You know, farmers used to, I believe, cut the milpa in March, then burn, and then start to plant by middle to late May, knowing that the rains are going to come in June. Well, in fact, if that is changed, you probably need to put some kind of shelter system, if it's either greenhouses or putting in an irrigation system, or changing even to a more drought-resistant variety. So there are all these adaptation measures that are required. And then finally, even getting maybe crop insurance for some of these issues. So there are many areas that we have to address, and I know the Ministry of Agriculture now has a climate change project in which they're looking at some of these options in the area of agriculture. Up north, obviously with the sugar industry, we probably need to do some issue of drainage because we have too much of our land is either underwater or we need irrigation systems. So we have to move around the water in the north, and I believe ASR, BSI are looking in that area to see what kind of a major investment would be required up there to guarantee a good supply of sugarcane for the factory.
So what you're saying is that agriculture is going to be one of the sectors that will have to, and has already started, to adapt to the changes.
That's correct, and it's not only in Belize, but as I said, even those countries that are the big deniers are also recognizing it, because even the dole and the big canning companies need to have a dependable supply of food for their canning purposes. So indeed, they are looking at the entire supply chain, and that is where Belize can play a significant role. If we are prepared to be able to say, hey, we can produce cacao for the chocolate market globally because we have taken the adaptation measures, we will be at the forefront. So to me, it also gives us an opportunity to enhance our capacity to produce.
So let me put you in the hot seat, literally. The heat that we're feeling in the mid of June, and I know people are still waiting on a substantial rain for this rainy season, is this because of climate change?
This is certainly a part of it. However, I think you have natural drivers that probably are greater impacts on it than climate change in the case of rainy season, hurricane season. And that is, this year is an El Nino year. And when you have an El Nino year, it means you have less hurricane activity in the Caribbean. And the producer of hurricanes are these tropical waves that come off Africa every year. So I think I heard in the weather report we're expecting a tropical wave in the next day or on Wednesday. So you'll probably see a little trigger. But indeed, if it is suppressed because of El Nino, you don't get as much rain as you would have expected at this time of the year. And I'm pretty sure the rainfall in Belize is substantially below normal than what we normally get for this time of the year.
So conversely, is it to say then that we're not experiencing as many cold fronts in December or early January as we normally would, and they're not as cold as we once experienced them?
That is correct. And so, in fact, when you look at the temperature records for Belize itself, yes, it is the cold days are not as cold as they used to be, as opposed to the hot days getting hotter. So, indeed, we are seeing the temperatures in the nighttime actually rising more than the daytime temperatures rising. So that is really what is the impacts of climate change in Belize. And so we probably have to use more fans and
that is
ACs
real.
at night.
Yeah, that is real.
I mean, other countries have had record high temperatures. And so I wanted to ask that because when we talk climate change, we say global warming, which makes us really just believe that it's getting hotter.
Yeah, it is on the average. However, it is also much more erratic. So we're seeing a lot more of these crazy cold days and very spiky conditions than we had before. So more hot days, but also conversely, many cold days also in certain parts of the world. So indeed, the weather is becoming a lot more erratic than we ever had before.
Yeah, and let's talk about the serious issue during this time, which is with the tropical cyclones. We know that the intensity of the storms has been partly attributed to climate change. Can you explain that to us?
Well, certainly. The energy for hurricanes to form and to strengthen comes from the temperature of the sea. That is, you need to have the sea surface temperature at least 27.5 degrees Celsius warm for it to form a hurricane. That's around 81 degrees Fahrenheit. The hotter the temperature of the sea is, the stronger the hurricane can get. And in fact, when we've seen hurricanes cross into the Caribbean Sea or into the Gulf of Mexico, if you see a pool of very hot water, and that hurricane goes over it, you immediately see the temperature, the speed pick up rapidly, intensify tremendously. Pressure falls and the wind picks up. So indeed, a warmer sea will produce a stronger hurricane. But in addition, something that is just being recognized now is the fact that hurricanes now have more precipitable water in them. So you have
What does that mean? Yeah.
It means that the hurricane can hold more water vapor and can rain more. than ever before. So that is what is occurring in New Orleans this past weekend when Barry went ashore. It produced a lot more rain than hurricanes ever did in the past. And in fact, 2 years ago, it was Harvey in the U.S., in Texas, produced over 50 inches of rainfall, one hurricane. And 50 inches of rainfall is what they get in a year in one hurricane event. So indeed, because of that, you have now the double impact of a stronger hurricane, which means stronger winds, higher storm surge, and more rainfall. A triple whammy now from what you got before.
And all because the seas have gotten warmer.
All that is correct.
1 degree.
Yeah.
By 1 degree, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. It does make 1 more degree seem catastrophic.
Indeed, exactly. And so when we are saying we need to limit it to 1.5, indeed, we're talking about that is almost the limits of our ability to adapt to climate change. Beyond that, we may have to think about what else do we do? You know, do we move inland? And do we see things that are occurring in North Africa 10 years ago and we're now seeing in Central America? Because the migration that we're seeing is also attributed to climate change. It is because of the droughts of the Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. Farmers say, I can't plant anymore. I don't see any options. I have to move north.
Is it to say then that the land is no longer arable?
Yes, but it is
dry?
also unpredictable, and that's the issue. Farmers, milk farmers, don't have any other resource of going to a bank, so they save some seeds from the previous crop to plant, and if that fails, what do I have? What can I do?
Yeah. And what about sea level rise? Because when you talk about moving inland, and you talk, we're a coastal city here, and we've always known prone to flooding below sea level. What are the implications for the coastal communities of Belize as we continue to see the manifestation of the effects of climate change?
Well, certainly, again, a huge threat for the country of Belize, because I think 50% of our population actually lives along the coast. So yes, we're going to have more erosion, but as the water starts to rise more and more, obviously we're going to get inundated. We see the municipal airport during a king tide every year now goes underwater, and that is going to continue to occur. So our investment in infrastructure is going to suffer, and people who have invested in their land, in purchasing property, obviously in 20 years, that property might not be there unless we invest more and more into reclamation, which is an option for Belize, fortunately, because we do have sufficient hills and landmass to be able to actually reclaim our land. However, many countries don't have that option in the Caribbean Sea. And if we look at the long-term investment, is it worthwhile to tear down land in the interior to reclaim land along the coast, which is going to continue to erode and erode, because while our trucks rest at night, the sea never rests. It continues, it continues, it continues. And you have a major hurricane comes along and washes out everything. So again, we have to look at how we are planning in the future. And that is where our land use managers are so important, where we can identify land that is good for development further inland, and we leave the coastline for the trip or two to the coast, to come to the beach, to go to the Keys, and we stop investing so much in coastal infrastructure because it is going to be more and more at risk.
So let's talk what can be done practically to, say for instance, try to save Monkey River, where the ebb and flow of the sea continues to eat away the shoreline.
Well, thank you for that question. We have a very interesting project proposal that we have made to the Cuban government, and they have a fantastic institute dealing with coastal zone resources and the Meteorological Service. And they have come up with a proposal. It is something they have done in Cancun already and in Dominican Republic, where they come in and they do a study of what is the cause of the erosion in particular. And once you know what the cause is, then you begin to address it. But in addition, they actually go out and they do precise measurements and classification of the soil in the Dangriga or Monkey River area. And they actually then go out and dive and find where the sand went.
That's interesting.
And then if there is enough of that sand there, you can actually then bring back that same sand to that location. and having addressed what the cause was, you then reclaim your land from the proper sand that was there, because you do not want to bring in an alien
I was
soil.
just going to say, you don't want to mix the sand.
Exactly. And so indeed, this has been done before, and there's certainly a proposal that we now have in front of us at the center to see, can we get this actually implemented in Belize?
Well, that would be
Interesting.
very
Yeah.
interesting to see indeed.
Yeah.
Now, you know, as we start to wrap up, I wanted to talk about some of the changes. We started off there, you know, whether we look at individual renewable resources, renewable sources of renewable energy, or having investment in renewable energy. What about, you said earlier that ideally where we want to get is that we have enough coming in, what is it, carbon emissions? Yeah. Used as much as being emitted. And a lot of that comes, if we go back to science, is from the green, the thing that we're so proud of, or Chiquibul or Vaca forest. There was a talk a while back about carbon credits and looking at how there is actually a value in having a rich natural resource of a forest. Is that a viable option for us here in Belize? Perhaps going the opposite route, instead of clearing for development, investing in a forest?
Indeed, and in fact, Belize is working very much in that area, in what we call RED+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And the country actually has a project with, I think, funded by the World Bank, in which we are doing the baselines as to where we are with it, and actually then putting in the policies and measures to address it. Interestingly enough, the emissions in Belize, 90% come from deforestation and land degradation. It is not from energy. We have done a great job in energy. Our biggest problem in energy is now with the mobile energy source. It is with our use of vehicles, is our biggest emitters. But our biggest emitters in the grand scale is from forestry, and that's an area we must address. And it comes from various sources. Yes, the one that makes the headlines is the illegal incursions into the Chiquibul by our neighbor. But we also have our own people going into the land, clearing, cutting and harvesting, and converting forest into agriculture. And those are the three things that we have to address, and I believe with this RED+ initiative at the Forestry Department, that is now being addressed, and hopefully we will be able to get into the carbon market, because there are two sources now that we believe we can now sell carbon credits to. One is from the aviation industry. The ICAO has recognized that they have to cut their emissions, and obviously aircraft depend tremendously on fossil fuels to fly. They are now looking at some vegetable-produced petroleum products, but that's going to take a while for it to really take on. But they want to see how they can contribute to reducing emission of greenhouse gases, and that could be by purchasing credits from a country like Belize, from forestry. The other area is, under the convention, there is an Article 6 that deals with the creation of a new market mechanism. And when that, and hopefully in Chile, we'll finally have a decision on that, on what it is and the rules for it. And again, another source that Belize could actually then participate in that market.
Yeah, and just to be clear, if you could explain how carbon credits work, because I think the airplane and the purchasing of carbon credits is a great example to use. So it's basically, if you're going to emit, you have to invest in.
Correct. So if you put a price of carbon emissions, and you recognize that I am emitting 1 million tons of carbon dioxide per year, and globally, an airline may be saying, okay, we will limit you to 1,000. Then you then have to compensate, then you have to then purchase another 900,000 from somebody who has done something to cut their emissions of greenhouse gases. And in the case of Belize, if we, because of our deforestation rates and so on, we can cut those emissions by policing, by stopping incursions, and by showing the world, based on our data, look, last year we were emitting 1 million, we have now cut it down to 500,000 through these measures that we have implemented. I will now sell those credits to you.
Oh, so we have to reduce our own emissions before we can sell our carbon credits.
Yes, exactly. It's going to be what we call results-based financing.
Okay.
That is, we cannot say, well, if you give me some money, I will cut it down. Obviously, the airlines can't depend on if, because they are the ones who are going to be then going to be charged for not.
So we can't sell the cleanup if we're also contributing to the mess.
Exactly correct.
In essence, the Forestry Department has to change its mandate entirely. to be able to focus specifically on those areas where we need to be reforesting as opposed to deforesting.
Exactly. But I think it should be a dual thing. Obviously, we have our forest as a natural resource. I mean, we have good mahogany that if we can harvest sustainably, and we make a nice, fancy mahogany table, that's going to stay there for 1,000 years, you know, and so it's going to be sequestered. So that is what we need to do, to use sustainable harvesting and then also cut down on the legal harvesting of products.
All right. And on a personal note, what can we all do to do our part?
Well, obviously, we need to do things at the individual level.
Yeah.
Do we really need to drive our own car to go 1 mile or 2 miles? Can we walk? When I was growing up, a coming of age thing, when you were age of 10 or 11, everybody got a bicycle. That's how you went. That's how you got to school. We need to probably bring that that kind of mobile thing back into us. Our use of water. We are wasting a lot of water, and people don't realize that every time you're wasting water, you're wasting energy, because obviously BWS then has to pump water out of the river and clean it and send it down to you. So how we are using our water is going to be an important one. Our use of food. Maybe we need to start to tell the vendors, you don't need to put in 5 spoons of rice in there because I'm not going to eat it anyhow. Put in only 3. You know, cut down our food sources. And of course, you know, cutting off lights and so on is going to be tremendously important.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for coming in and having this extended conversation with us, reminding us once again why it's important that we pay attention to the conversation that's taking place with climate change.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll get new updates from ASR BSI. Please stay here.